Welcome to the Crafting Character Podcast. Steve Carter here, and in association with my good friends at Preaching Today and Food for the Hungry, I bring you a podcast that hopefully helps you get better at the craft of teaching and preaching and communicating God's word, while always ensuring and hoping that our character leads the way. Well, today I'm excited because I get to have a conversation with a dear, dear friend. We went to college together. We've led in different churches. We have walked closely through difficult seasons together. He has just been one of the safest places for me, someone I just deeply, deeply respect for the way that he serves and loves and preaches and helps and guides. His name is Mike Goldsworthy. He is an adjunct professor at Hope International University, our alma mater. He is an executive coach to some of my favorite preachers in the country, to be honest. He is just a guy who has been a safe, guiding presence for many, many incredible leaders in both the church space, but also the marketplace. He also travels and speaks, and I'm just a really, really gifted communicator. He hosts an incredible podcast. They've been walking through the divine conspiracy, just chapter by chapter with different guests, and just a thoughtful leader. And he and I were in a conversation a couple months back, and we started to talk about plagiarism. And I wish I would have been recording that conversation, because as we were talking, it was probably about 15 minutes in, I was like, dang it, this would be perfect for Crafting Character, because I think plagiarism is the next big thing. I'm telling you, friends, I think it is the next big thing that is coming. And so, not to create fear, but to create suspense, and then to have a chance to have you learn from a dear friend, Mike Goldsworthy. Mike, welcome to the Crafting Character Podcast.
That all was so super kind of you. And, I feel all the things about you, and I'm such a fan of this podcast, and just what a genuine honor to get to hang out with you here.
Thanks, man. Well, I think it's fun because you and I often will chop about a myriad of conversations. Sometimes, a book will come out and we're like, hey, have you read that book? Or, hey, you'll send me a teaching. Dude, did you hear Justin's latest talk? And I'm like, oh, I got to listen to it now. Different issues come up, and man, something about the plagiarism conversation, just for a few moments, I was like, oh man, I think that with how accessible content is these days, with how much, content is being produced these days, whether weekend services, devotionals, chapters of books, like social media, it's really, really hard, I think, for people to really discern what idea is theirs and what idea isn't. So I thought maybe, you and I could just talk through that, how you've done that over the years, because
stolen other people's stuff.
Well, and I think it's so amazing is when you think about it, just from the forefront, it's like we talk about how creative God is and how original we all are, made in his image, but then how easy it is just to steal someone else's stuff.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is?
Well, can I first tell you about the story of I think you were thinking about this, I think maybe before I was. We were looking at some of your old blogs a little bit ago where you were writing about this years ago. But this first came on my radar in, I think it was 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. I had transitioned to become pastor of a large church in Southern California, and got invited to this conference of pastors of large churches. And it was pastors and their spouses, and we're all there. There's probably, 40-ish of us whose churches raised in size from 1,000 to 20,000. And at that gathering of 40-ish pastors, there were two pastors at that gathering who were under discipline at that time from their churches for stealing Rick Warren's sermons and passing them off as their own.
Wow.
So we're not talking about like a small church that like you don't have other staff and you're a solo pastor and you've got to do everything from janitoring to counseling to preaching. We're talking about people who like probably are allotted 20 hours of their week to be able to put into the craft of preaching. And two of them, and both of them said the same thing. They both said, I don't understand why this is an issue. Rick said we can use his stuff and we don't have to give him credit. I was just doing what Rick said we could do with his sermons.
Wow. Wow. What? Okay. So like, that's 15, 16 years ago. What's going through your mind when you hear this? Are you like, at that time, were you kind of like, oh yeah, it's not that big of a deal? Or you're like, wait, what? Like, how did you, when you heard that, what was that creating within you?
Yeah. I mean, I had multiple things because I had 8 years earlier started my youth ministry by using other people's sermons. And I intentionally had done it because I felt like I got to do this work to build the youth ministry. And so I need some good sermons. So I'm going to have a season of a few months where this is what I'm going to do. And so I had this like, oh crud, am I going to get found out? So I had like that kind of moment. I had this moment of like, how do they not understand the difference between Rick giving you permission and what is actually ethically okay? Like, there's something that was there that I was like, there's a difference between somebody saying you can use this and then you just, you then going to people who trust you and you're violating their trust. And then I was like, how are we in this place where like folks are not able to like, are given the time to like do this thing that maybe is the most visible part of their job. And they like that. I really wanted to try to understand why is it that they are not able to or don't feel capable of or don't have the capacity to like do their own content and need to like utilize other people's content. Like what's going on there? So yeah, it was probably messing with me in a few ways.
Yeah, it's so interesting because in how much the game has changed, from the 90s. The 90s were like the beginning of the tape ministry. If you were Swindoll, you were up on radio. But if you weren't, like beneath that was like you had a strong tape ministry at your church, and then those tapes would then go out and be sent out. And they typically would go to different pastors. I mean, when I was at Mars Hill in Grand Rapids, I mean, the amount of tapes that would get made and sent to different churches before podcasts, those were coming. Well, now if you're not a congregant, if you're not like a pastor and aren't paying the $3.50 for each week for the tape, you're not listening to that sermon. You're not hearing it. So you would be able to get it. Nobody would know. You could listen to Swindoll or Rob or whoever it was, Willow, whatever, Rick Warren, and make it your own. And you could pass it off as you. Now, though, with the onslaught of podcasts, social media, YouTube, it's like there is no more tape ministry. And those ideas now, people know that was Furtick, or that was Warren, or that was Tara Beth Leach. That was somebody else's stuff.
Yeah.
And which I think that we've just been able to see this kind of emergence of technology that's made content wildly more accessible that I thought would almost prevent more plagiarism from happening. But I think it's actually sped it up.
Yeah, I think that you're 100% right. And I've experienced this in a couple of ways. And I'm sure we will move beyond telling all the dirty stories, but like I want to tell a couple of the stories first, because I think it sets up like how pervasive this actually is. So one was I was teaching homiletics, preaching class at our alma mater, and the dean of the school was bringing in different people at times who would come in and do some stuff at the school, and then would come in and like would guest lecture in my class. You came and did that once. A few other of our friends came and did that. There was this pastor of this large church who came in and did that, and we asked him like, "Hey, would you share your sermon prep process?" And he said, "Here's what I start with: is the first thing that I do is I listen to between 8 and 12 sermons on that topic from other people. And so it's like, if your prep process starts with, I'm going to listen to other people preaching on the thing that I'm going to preach on this weekend, like, of course, like you can't help but to like, of course that's going to be, you're going to regurgitate a bunch of their stuff. Like that's what's going to happen. So it's like, it's so easy for him to like he can like search and find that sermon, and he can have them all down, and he can spend his Monday just listening to a bunch of people's sermons. And it's so easy and accessible to be able to do something like that right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's such a fascinating, because part of underneath that is, how do you discern what is actually yours and what was somebody else's? And I understand the pragmatist. The pragmatist leader, the strategic leader goes, why would I do all the work that McDonald's has already done? I'm gonna put a Starbucks right across the street from McDonald's because they already chose the best real estate. So it's like, I can see the pragmatist, but them not actually doing the work, it becomes wildly more easy to be about transferring information, somebody else's, by the way, rather than speaking from a transformed place, which gets very, very murky very quickly as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm curious, like, where have you seen that line of like that you are utilizing maybe somebody else's idea sparked something that started you on your own direction versus like using their content and passing it off as your own?
So 2 stories for me. The first one was in 2008. I spoke at a student conference on like speaking, preaching. And I was like a student pastor at that time, and at Mars Hill in Grand Rapids. And I remember talking about Genesis 1 and how like the earth was formless and empty. In Hebrew it's tohu vavohu, and it was chaos. And I was trying to get to the point that like God spoke, let there be light, into the chaos. And that's what began the process of shaping and forming in the great poem of Genesis 1. And someone sent me a nasty email saying I had plagiarized a Rob Bell because he used the word tohu vavohu first. And so in one sense I was like, okay, number one, like I lived in Rob's basement for a year. So I could start to like rationalize he doesn't know. But then secondly, I'm like, wait. I used a Hebrew phrase. Rob doesn't have intellectual property over Hebrew phrases. But he did build out a whole talk on that phrase that is masterful. But I didn't even sample that talk. I just used that phrase to describe what it meant. But the whole point was speaking into it, like the power of the spoken word. So I had to like sit there. But what it did lead to me is I had to start to realize, okay, where do I discern the difference? And I started to think about songs like Bittersweet Symphony, where this band had sampled the Rolling Stones, and the Rolling Stones took all of the money from that song because they had used one too many bars of music. And so Rolling Stone, and the way that law was written, was they had sampled and violated intellectual copyright and property. And so they had to get that away. There's nothing like that when it comes to preaching. And so you almost have to like every pastor and their board has to come up and say, hey, this is what we think. Second story, I'm at Willow, and we have a guy who's over the kind of copyright insurance, and an elder board calls and is saying that I have stolen the sermons of their pastor. So it's a serious complaint. And so I'm like, oh my goodness. I'm like, who? And they tell me the name, and I'm like, I don't even know the name. Like, where's that guy from? It is a small church in some place. I couldn't even tell you. But here's the whole piece of it. That the elder had heard me teach, went and confronted the pastor, and the pastor said, yeah, Steve stole that. When it ended up being the pastor had stolen it from me and lied to his board, but the board believed their pastor, and I got called into all of these meetings. And I'm like, guys, I can show you all my notes. I can show you this. And that pastor ended up getting fired. And it was and that church ended up apologizing. It was a huge ordeal. Anyways, I say all that to go, that's where like I have these like moments now where even when I'm writing a book, I don't like to listen because I'm so afraid of like, will I have taken someone's idea? Like it's a little bit nerve-wracking in that. And so it's hard though. It's a hard fight. What would you offer up? Like, let's just say, let's say you got an idea. I mean, and it's from a pastor you deeply respect, a book that they wrote. How do you bypass the sneaky and also bring up like how to honor where the idea comes from?
Yeah. So I think that there's two ways to think about it. Or two like paths that both matter. So there's kind of like the personal work path, and then there's just like the pragmatic one.
Yep.
Would one of those be more helpful to talk about?
Yeah. Let's start with the personal, like the prep side. Let's talk through that.
Yeah. I mean, I think on the prep side, like removing kind of even the practical piece from the prep side is like that idea has to do a work in you before you're preaching it. And one of the like things that's difficult is that like people that are preaching week in, week out, you have to put out a lot of content, and it can be really tempting to like to just be grabbing other people's content, not because you have malicious whatever. It's because Steve made this great point, and that would be helpful for my congregation. So I'm going to grab that and make that point. You've made some great points, but I actually think like to stand up in front of a congregation and to be able to talk about it, it needs to have done something in me before I can like stand up there and do it. And so we have to move the sermon away from just like you were talking about this earlier. It's not just content delivery. It's like a performative act. It's like performance art that is meant to help to spur on some sort of transformative movement that like somehow gets shortcut and bypassed and missed when it's not doing that work in me first before I show up on the stage and do that stuff. Right.
Dude, that's so good because which begs like a question. And I remember I had to like ask myself this question is, and you like preachers, please like hear this and ask yourself this honest question. How many times in one calendar year can you go through that process well?
Yes.
Because again, like I got to a point where I thought, Mike, I can only do this 34 times. Now I might preach 68 times in a calendar year. I'm not coming up with 68 new talks. It will be 34 in this calendar year, and I might be recycling 18 from the previous 2 years to get me to whatever that number needs to be. But like, I think you've got to be able to ask yourself, honestly, if that's 24, I'd rather have 24 really transformative talks than pushing for 42, and it's not that.
That's right. It's so good. And it's like, there's so many ways to do that. Like, I love that you recognize, hey, if I could do 24, but I actually need to show up more Sundays than that. There are other ways to do that are integrous. There's also, I love one of the moves that's happened in the time that you and I have been in ministry has been a move to much more teaching teams. And even at small churches, like I've worked with a lot of small churches that have a robust teaching team of women and men in the church who are great communicators, who the pastor has helped develop as like, they're not staff members, but they like are on a preaching rotation. And that helps. Like, there's just so many like creative ways to be able to deal with, but first being honest about like, how many weekends can I actually deliver that kind of content? And then there's the practical piece. And so the practical piece, I do think, begins in your prep. I think like you need to be in your prep, just denoting where you're getting ideas from as you're doing that. And that happens like for whatever your prep process is, whether you are prepping during that week or like some of us that are like working on it for, in some ways, years and months ahead of time where you're gathering ideas, those ideas should always, like, you've just got to get in the practice of always earmarking where those ideas are coming from, however you're collecting it. And then when you're delivering it, I've seen people do a lot of different things that I think could be helpful. I think like if a large chunk of your teach is coming from somebody else, that it's like, it did this work in me and I don't think I can actually improve on what they did. Like, I think I can take it and like, I'm not going to tell their story. I'm going to tell my story. But like, if I'm honest, it's their structure, it's their outline, and I'm kind of filling it in a little bit. It's at the beginning of the sermon, just getting up and just acknowledging, like on the front end, to say like, hey, this talk really did a work in me. And it was so transformative that like, I just want to acknowledge, like, I got this from Tara Beth, and it was really significant to me. And so I just want you to know, like, while it's done a work in me and I'm going to share the way it's done a work in me, that you need to know that this is her content. And
Yes.
you just give this little disclaimer at the front end. And I think you can do that in a way, it's not going to kill the flow of the sermon.
Yeah.
So it acknowledges where it came from, acknowledges it did something in you, you move on there. I think that you can like find ways to quote throughout, right? Like, I think you do this really well, that you do a really good job of like, you will throw in quotes and acknowledge the person where it's coming from, that it's like, I once heard Dallas Willard say this, and, you know, and you'll find ways to sort of do that still work in the flow of a sermon, that doesn't feel like you're standing up and giving a talk that's really academic paper where you're just citing a bunch of sources.
Yep.
So I think using like language like that really is helpful. I think there's one guy who I said in his sermon, and what he did is in his sermon notes every week, he just provided resources that he's like, these, and it just said like, this is what I drew from for my sermon this week. And so he didn't cite it throughout, but it was like, here's the 10 books I used and all the things. And so people, it was just this way of people knowing, and people could do their own work with it.
Yeah.
Mike,
can I double click on a couple of these for a second? Because I think these are really, really helpful. I think early on, one of my biggest faults was trying to find a system to correctly categorize a thought or where I got an idea from. So I might put down like, oh gosh, that was this word or this phrase or this line, and I would drop that into Evernote or whatever I was using, but I didn't write who, and I wouldn't source it, and I wouldn't footnote it, and then it was like, then I'm having to like try to rely on recall, and I remember going, dang it, I don't know where I got that from. And so I'd either have to be sneaky or not use it, Talk about for you, because you do this really, really well. Like what's your kind of, when you're studying, are you a Google Doc guy? Like when you read it, does it go right into your notes? How do you capture content and where you got it from? Well,
yeah, I mean, I'm an Evernote guy for all of that. And so I'm dumping it into Evernote. And I am like, so I was just doing some work on a parable, and I've got like on my desk back here, I've got like 5 books that I was like sorting through on that parable. And all that I'll do in my Evernote note where I'm working through that specifically is I'll just write, okay, I'm using this book by this author. And then I'm dumping under that line, I'm just dumping whether it's quotes or ideas that are all spurred on from there. And then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And so I, at the very least, have that. I take a lot of pictures. So I'll take pictures from a book if I'm reading a physical book, and I'll take a picture. And when I take a picture, I either make sure if on that page it shows what book it is. If it doesn't do that, then I take a second picture of the cover of the book, and I have it there. Those are probably the 2 main ways I'm doing that. Or anytime I'm capturing a quote, I am trying to, like, because I used to do the same thing. You couldn't find it, and I'm just going to take the extra 45 seconds to write down where it came from.
Yeah, it's so good. That is the discipline. The second thing is, how do you know? Like, because I think I just saw a pastor in Edmonton, Daniel M. He did a great job of this. He did a whole talk on shame, but it was really, really, you could see, and he stated this very well, but you could see that it was really heavily influenced by Kurt Thompson's book and work on shame.
Mhm.
And so he like stood up on stage and he like held up the book, had a cover up on the screen behind him and just said, "Hey, if I stopped every time in this teach and said Kurt Thompson said this message will be 4.5 hours."
I love that.
But I want you to know, in recent months, no book has impacted me as much as this one on the conversation of shame. This is like Cliff Notes. Please buy this book. And then after the teach, he posted about the books that like really, to your point, almost like in the like preaching CCLI, like what goes under every worship song, like these are the books that really influenced it. And Kurt Thompson reshared it, which I loved, and it just, so I think there is a way to do that. But my question is, I think in that rationalization of the preacher, like, I mean, am I really using much of Kurt Thompson? Am I really using enough of that author? How do you know? When does it feel uncomfortable for you to not mention and healthy and comfortable too? Is there a percentage point? Is there a line? Is there a way at which you discern?
I don't know if I have a good like solid line other than like, well, let me say two things. Let me first say, like, I do think you and I were chatting earlier outside of this about like the personal work of doing, like being curious about your own motivations and constantly having curious investigation of your own motivations. And I think like that sort of like internal, intentional work that you're inviting others into helps keep you just in check in general and is a work in this. But I was thinking about illustration that I've used several times from Richard Beck. He's this fantastic existential psychologist out of Abilene Christian University, written several things that have been really impactful for me. And he, I think it's in his book, Unclean, he talks about the psychology of disgust and uses, like, there's so much from it that it's so helpful and good. And he uses this illustration where he says that when he gives talks on this, he'll invite college students to come up and he has them spit into a Dixie cup. And then he asks them, will you now swallow what you just spit into that Dixie cup? And nobody's ever done it. No one will ever do it. They're grossed out by it. And then he says this, he says, what's interesting is that you are already constantly doing that. As I've been talking, you are constantly swallowing your own saliva, like constantly. Yeah. But now what's happened is because it's gone outside of your body, you see it as something other. And he uses that to talk about the psychology of disgust and how we other people. So I've used that illustration multiple times. The first time I used it, I said, imagine I were to invite you up here and I were to have you spit into a Dixie cup. I want you to all imagine that you're spitting into a Dixie cup right now. And now if I were to ask you to drink that, would you do it? So the first time I share it, I'm like sharing it as if it's my own idea. And then I had this conviction of like, this isn't my idea. This is Richard Beck's. And I clearly got it from him. And so then the next time I shared it, what I did is I said, there's this great existential psychologist, Richard Beck. And he tells this story about like what he would do is he would ask college students to come up and do it. And I would tell it like similar to how I just told it. And I don't think the story lost anything. And I think it gave credibility. And I think it actually pointed people to Beck's work also, which like is meaningful. But there was something for me that like hit me after I had shared it that I was like, that was wrong. And I think it was like, so I screwed up. But it was also that work that you and I were talking about of, what are my motives here? What am I doing here?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it's such a great story because you could look at that and I'm sure, so many pastors like, oh man, I've done that so many times. I think there's like a very relatable piece. If you go back to like the history of the pastor, they went to seminary in a small little farming town, set up this Presbyterian church, Methodist church, or, they were some of the smartest people around theology and the ideas of God and the principles. And so people looked and they were like, oh, that's a smart pastor. He's got to be so well read. He's got to be the smartest person. That's our pastor. It's just not the truth anymore. We're not the smartest people in our congregations at all. And there are women who are more brilliant and men more brilliant than us. But there's sometimes I think we're trying to still like prove ourselves, especially as younger communicators, like prove that we know enough. But I think, and I'll never forget, a mentor of mine telling me this, like, you know what you actually look like when you try to pass off information that's not yours as yours, and people know? They're like super insecure. He doesn't really know, really sneaky. Yeah. But you know what you actually really look like when you demonstrate that you read and you learn and you give credit, that you're humble and secure, and people and all of a sudden it changed it for me. Like, oh my goodness, like from the motivation side, you're totally right. But then the second side of it is like, oh, like what you did with Richard Beck was of course Mike is well read. Of course he can give credit. And in doing that, there's a humility and a security that I can use other people's ideas and give them credit and introduce people to more beautiful ideas and people. It was like this farther reaching piece in how much bigger the kingdom is when we live like that than just like, I gotta be the one that's the smartest person, the most, wisest person in the room, So yeah, I just thought it was really interesting. So
yeah, I mean, it feels like that feels like a spiritual discipline of like, I don't have to show up as the smartest person in the room. I'm going to show how I am not. I'm going to show how I'm learning. There's also like maybe a spiritual discipline around, I don't always have to be spectacular. Ooh. And there's a lot of like pressure we put on ourselves to show up and to feel like we're hitting a home run every week, and to let ourselves hit some singles, and to be okay with that is so difficult, because you're showing up. I think preaching is one of the most vulnerable things that you can do. You are showing up in front of a group of people to talk about some of the most intimate things of life, the most intimate things about the way they live life, that we live life, that the most intimate things about what we believe about the divine and how the transcendent enters into our lives and interacts with us. Like, gosh, it's so vulnerable. You put yourself in such a vulnerable situation. And so you want to do it well. And there's this temptation to always appear spectacular, as opposed to like, sometimes you just put in the work and you're gonna hit a double, and it's gonna be a fine enough sermon, and that's okay. And so like you release the pressure valve a little bit of having to like force it into something. So I'm gonna grab other people's things to make it a thing and make it look like it's mine, to make myself appear more spectacular.
Yeah, I think that's so good, because it is like you can create a pressure that almost produces, I have to plagiarize, because you don't trust your idea. You don't trust the idea that God's given to you, or like you don't trust like the fact that a double is going to be okay. It's like amazing how like just a little bit of pressure or fear or shame or insecurity, what that could really invite you to bypass. I think also the other side of it too is in a world where the internal work, like it's not just a teaching about like transferring what you know, but that internal transformation, all that takes time, and it's like, so like you can't microwave spiritual formation, so that's going to take time, and I think just recognizing you might hit the same theme 4 times in a calendar year, and it might not be till the 3rd or 4th talk where you're like, oh, I'm finally getting close to like what it means to be patient. You know what I mean? Like it's just like, but I think we're constantly moving from one idea to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, that we're not even letting an idea sit and marinate enough, you know?
So can I ask you a question about this?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm excited to ask you about this because so in your new book, Grieve, Breathe, Receive, you talk about the story of Zacchaeus, and you unpack it in a way that I had never experienced somebody unpacking it in that way before, and it was brilliant and interesting, and I think that it was authentic to the text. I don't think you were doing something that doesn't make sense of the text, but what you did with it. I don't know if you've done a teach on it, if you've used it in that kind of way, but I'm super curious about like, I was thinking about like, gosh, this had to have done a work on you in some sort of way for you to get to a point where you're able to share about it in this way that has this unique perspective. I'm curious what that process looked like.
Yeah. So I think there's kind of like a number of ways. I was really moved because I think going to college, Bible college, I thought that there was only one meaning for every text. And it wasn't until like I got more connected to the Jewish roots and beginning to recognize, you know, there's like 70 different interpretations they believe for every text. And you just constantly got to see it and introduced to, you know, God was in this place and I did not know by Lawrence Kushner, which is basically 7 different rabbis' interpretation of that one verse. That's how each chapter breaks down. It's an amazing book. So I think part of that has always made me curious. And so I remember reading Marcus Borg. And Marcus Borg had talked about how the Lord's Prayer was like a mission statement. And like if you asked a rabbi, teach me how to pray, it's in his book, Heart of Christianity. You were asking a rabbi, like, what's your mission? What's your vision? What do you hope to see accomplished here on earth? And I remember like it changed the whole trajectory of like, this isn't just a prayer, but this is like a both tangible and spiritual. Like it's both. It's so I'm like reading that. And then all of a sudden I read Acts 2 and I'm like, holy crap, it's the embodiment of the Lord's Prayer. The first church, these disciples were like, what are we going to do? We're going to make sure people have bread, fellowship, like, and the Lord added to, like, it was like, this is what it looks like when you embody the Lord's Prayer. So I send Marcus Borg an email and I'm like, hey, you said this in Heart of Christianity. Acts 2 seems to be the embodiment of that. Have you ever thought about that? And I'll never forget his email back to me like 2 days later. Never thought about that. Could be. Thanks for sharing. MB. That's what he wrote. And I just remember like, oh my goodness. But for me, I could see the connection. And I think part of it is like, can you see the connection? And sometimes you have to recognize, is the connection a stretch? And if it's a stretch, you have to use words like perhaps, could it be? It made me wonder if this could be fascinating, if this were to be true, some kind of like precursor. But then I think when it came to the Zacchaeus one, I just realized the parable of the talents and the minas and the parable of the minas are not the same, but they're always seen in the same way. And their stories are different. And it made me just wonder, I became fascinated with, well, Zacchaeus had to go back to work the next day. Like, does he go back to work for the empire? Doing what is treasonous or did his whole life, once he awakened to another idea, did he have to change? And that just kind of led me into that midrash of perhaps, and then seeing some of what Josephus had written about the backstory of Herod's son and what happened with him. I was like, I think there's something here. The location was right down the road from where, Archelaus's like compound was, so all of that stuff just starts and you're like, I think I can make a reasonable connection, but I didn't have like someone who I had read that from and gotten it. There's probably only been a dozen of those that have happened in my life. Most of them have been some sense of influence that started it And then I found my way through. This one was like, I found something, and then it was like, oh, Josephus, location. It was like able to get connected.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting to me about that, you are definitely unique in this, in the way that your mind works. So I think it's not as natural for everybody. But like a couple of things that I'm hearing was like, it was a process over time, that it wasn't just like, I've got to preach on Zacchaeus this weekend, or I've got to put this thing in my book, that it's like, there's something that was sitting there. You're obviously doing a lot of other reading to be able to like build these other connections. You've got to have a lot of inputs coming in. So you got to be paying attention in a lot of different ways. You got to have room and capacity to say, oh, the scripture can be looked at in all these different ways. And so I'm going to have this constant curiosity about it. And I'm going to be curious about each time I'm coming to it. I'm not just going to assume here's how I understand and preach Zacchaeus. So I have a curiosity to say, like, is there something more here? Is there something else that's going on here? I think like those things, those sorts of things, it's, again, you're saying like it's not microwave, just like a sermon can't be microwave, personal development can't be microwaved. And I'm hearing that like slow sort of thing that's happening over time to do that. And are you then also, so that's like, let's say you're preaching that's just one weekend sermon that took all of that. And you've got your other 32.
Yeah. Well, let me say this too. I preached that Zacchaeus message on a Wednesday night midweek in 2013, 2014.
Okay.
And it wasn't that great. I knew that there was a connection. It wasn't actually ready to be preached, but I liked the idea of it. I thought there was something there. And the big idea was, just because someone told you that the parable was the same doesn't mean it's always the same. But like, I think I didn't land that plane well enough, but I still knew that dog could hunt. But it took me another almost 10 years before I got that like written to a point where I can tell it in a way where it's like, when I'm talking about Zacchaeus and what he does for the empire, it's take, extort, do it again, provide for the empire, take, extort. Like I built it to like these phrases, but that took time.
Yep.
That took almost 10 years. So just like from a clarity standpoint, from a timeline piece, that I didn't think about it like that, but yeah, that's very true.
Well, I love that too, because I think that's the, like, you preached a mediocre message on it. And so you let yourself do that. And then also you didn't just stay, like, it wasn't like one and done. It kept working on you.
Yes. And when you have lived experience, then all of a sudden it comes back and go,
intersects.
Oh my goodness, that's deeper than I thought it was. You know what I mean? Like, oh man, like, ooh,
yeah,
this is a willful blindness. So
it's all like, I think that it's a helpful conversation around the pragmatics of like, when's it plagiarism, when it's not plagiarism. But I think like the bigger thing is about the message doing this work on you doing your own work over time, that you have thoughtful, original content to be able to share, not for the sake of being original, but because it's done something in you that you now have like to let it come out of you.
Yes, exactly. And I think this is another side is, the more that you try to take on, so let's just say like a book deal. You take a book deal on, or you try to speak at more conferences. I mean, there's something where I think like people are like, oh, I really want that life. I really want to do that. Fine, whatever you feel God's calling you to, that's between you and the Lord. But like often with underneath that is a level of pressure. And sometimes I think that's where people start to bypass the real work, because they're like, I gotta pump out another book that's got to sell better than the last one. And I gotta be at these 5 conferences, and I can't be the same talk. They got to be a new talk. And and all of a sudden the output is far outpacing the healthy transformative input. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think, and it's like, there's been times, if I'm really honest, there's been some books I've picked up recently that I've like read, and I was like, that's not your work. you might have changed a few words, but like you're there's like a new generation that's reading it, but that's not your work. And not that I'm like, oh, I want to call this person out or cancel. I'm not trying to do that, but like it for me, for a moment, made me feel sad because I'm like, you didn't need to do that. And someday that's all going to catch up.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And gosh, do you think we see this more like now that we're talking like not just a sermon, but content that pastors and preachers are putting out beyond just a sermon? Are we seeing that more in the Christian space, or is that like are you seeing that all over the place where people are just utilizing content because like we are in an information age where we've got to put out a lot? Is that like just in the cultural waters right now to do that?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think it's to a degree, right? I mean, how you see an artist, and then it's like, oh, okay, a whole bunch of people like start trying to copy that kind of style or that kind of font or that kind of design.
Yeah.
You see a musician, and then everyone's like, all right, I'm going to try and sign the next band that's like, the Arctic Monkeys or Arcade Fire. Like there you see like, because they're like, oh man, we can hit. I just think it's just the weirdest one when it's connected to faith, because, and again, art is still connected to inspiration. It's connected to God's, creativity and all that stuff. And so, but I think when it's, I was with a bunch of pastors a few months ago, and someone got up and shared, and this guy leans over to me and goes, that's the 11th time I've heard that message. And I was like, you've heard this guy speak 11 times this year? And he goes, oh, no. It's just the 11th time I've heard that exact illustration and message. And he's the 11th guy to do it. And I was like, what? In the same year? He's like, I feel like every conference I was going to, I was hearing this same talk, the same verse, the same story, the same. And I think that there is something in the church where we feel like it's okay to break the rules. Like we feel like, oh, it's permission. It's God's anyway. It's God's idea. It's not Mike Goldsworthy's idea. It's not Steve Carter's idea. It's God's. So like, and if I give it credit that God gave you that message to speak, then I can't take it. But for me to minimize that you're just a conduit, not an actual human spiritual being, it allows me to almost colonize that idea. I think I don't know. I'm trying to get to like the what's going through someone's mind to be able to do that. And I'm not saying that they've overly thought this, but I think that there's some sense of underlying subconscious that says, oh, I can take that. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, I remember when you and we did a few events together that we called Sermon Camp, where we'd bring a handful of pastors together for 2 days, and we would like interact with some thought leader, and then we would spend time like processing that. And when we were talking about it, one of the impetuses for that was us talking about like, how do we help people who need shortcuts? Because like, that's just the reality of pastoral life. You need shortcuts. And instead of vilifying people who are using shortcuts, can we create a way to help them have a shortcut to create some original, thoughtful content? And so can we like get away for 2 days and spend a day learning from somebody and spend a day like creating and processing? Because it's just there's a real pressure.
Yeah. I still think that was one of the greatest ideas ever. We never could find a way to make it like actually make money, but I like the concept of, we went and we spent 2 days in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we got to learn around the ethics of the Sermon on the Mount. And you talk a little bit about who we interviewed.
Yeah, well, we had the ethicist Stanley Hauerwas there, and if you don't know Dr. Hauerwas, he Time Magazine several years ago called him the America's best theologian. And he's just like, he's super ornery. And so his response to that was, there is no theological category for best.
It's so good. It's so funny. But what was so fun though was then a bunch of people created sermon series based on what we got to learn together and the different interpretations. And, a book came out of that from Jason Miller. I mean, he had been working on some stuff with the Beatitudes. It was amazing. But like just all of these different conversations. And I look at that and I go, gosh, like to be able to not just have me up in an office by myself trying to dream up an idea, but to have it be shared, lived, embodied. It was such a fun experience. And so I think that's another great way for any of you who are listening is, get a bunch of people on Zoom and like, hey, let's do a sermon series on the book of Philippians and let's like read together and share together. And because you have to find that life hack, because if you don't, you're going to just feel that pressure. And some of us don't handle pressure very well.
Yeah. And then here's what you do is you say, like, hey, this sermon series, like there's a group of us from around the country that have been working on this together. And I've learned so much from my friends. And so some of the stuff that's going to come out of this is like, I just want you to know that like, it is from these women and men around the country who I am learning from and learning with.
Yes. I mean, and again, it makes the kingdom of God so much smaller and so much more wide. And Mike, again, do you think, I mean, I kind of set it up like with a little bit of fear and not trying to create or sell fear in any way, but do you think it's going to be a big issue? I mean, because like even like with book contracts now, I don't know if you've seen this, the newest paragraph in a book contract is you will not use AI in any portion of the writing. And they have the software now to go back and tell, and they're running manuscripts through AI to go, oh yeah, 67 or 91% would say that this was written by AI. So like you use the word twice, ethics. There is an ethic right now that I think it's a little squishy when it comes to the church. AI, plagiarism, intellectual property. Just any thoughts on that? Do you think it's a big issue and for our day? And gosh, what kind of pastoral call or just push would you give our listeners?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do think it's increasingly becoming more and more of an issue, and maybe even more like accepted as normative. I remember in one of my preaching classes that I was teaching, a student coming in and preaching almost a full sermon that I knew was somebody else's. I actually knew the person who had preached the original sermon and didn't call the student out in front of everybody, but like, pulled him aside afterwards and had to talk through it. And I thought, gosh, when you and I were going through homiletics, maybe I was naive to it, but I don't remember anybody doing anything that would have been like that. It wasn't all as widely available, right? So I do think it's becoming more and more of an issue. I think ethics, especially ethics like this, need to be wrestled through in community. And that, especially if you are a pastor of a local church, that it is about figuring out where that line is for you and figuring it out alongside those who you're accountable to, your board, your elders, your pastoral team, that it's not just you doing that, and that you figure out like, okay, hey, this is how we want to acknowledge where other people's work is coming from. This is where we feel like it has crossed a line. This is like where we have communally discerned together what that sort of looks like. I think if we're to try to create like one monolith of that, I'm not sure that if it's going to be the most helpful, but I think, yeah, if people are asking that question in community with people that they're accountable to.
I love that. I think that's a really great, a great point. The elders at Forest City Church, where I serve, every month when we meet, we typically have like a little topic of conversation. Our next elder meeting, we're talking about Tove and Pivot with Scott McKnight and Laura Barringer, which I'm excited, but it's like an opportunity to like talk through, what does this look like? But I do think that's a good communal conversation that maybe with your board, hey, what does plagiarism look like in your sphere, like the space of their marketplace, what they do? But then two, what would be some guiding principles to ensure? Because I'll tell you what, oftentimes it might not be you who might be plagiarizing, but you could have somebody else who's a younger voice who hasn't been taught on this. And what you're doing is you're playing with trust. And what you want to do, almost like when you're raising a kid, is like preserve innocence, but like from the platform and from the stage, you want to preserve trust. You want people to not have anything where they can look up and go, they're not trustworthy, or that's not really them, or they're not doing their work, And so part of that, I think, is a really good idea, is to maybe with your elders or your teaching team, or even your executive team, leadership team, to talk through like, hey, how do we want to make sure these are some of our values when it comes to the ethics of an idea and how to communicate that in the best possible way. Mike, thanks so much for joining us, man. I hope, friends, you just could get a sense for how thoughtful this guy is. I mean, the questions he asks, the spirit, the tone. Mike, you host this podcast. Talk a little bit about that and what kind of the conversations that you're having on that podcast.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's called The Space for Faith. And we are like trying to invite folks in who are thinking about what does it mean to be the church in our current moment. And so we'd been doing that for a little while, took a little break. And what we're doing right now is a book called The Divine Conspiracy. It's written by a guy named Dallas Willard that transformed my life, transformed a bunch of people's lives, and thought like it would be so fun to do a kind of book club. So what we're doing with that right now is just kind of like taking it chapter by chapter, inviting some folks in to like reflect on the chapter with us, and inviting folks to like read along with us in it.
Yeah. And Mike, I'll just say, is like his podcast is fantastic. It's a great listen. But Mike is one of those unique guys who can really stay grounded and centered in varying spaces and really just listen and draw out the best and really create that space for incredible dialogues and conversations around matters of faith. So, Mike, where else can people find you?
I'm at mikegoldsworthy.com. And then the Instagram is mgoldsworthy.
M. Goldsworthy. Well, friends, thank you so much for tuning into the Craft and Character podcast. And man, I'd honestly love to hear your thoughts about plagiarism, and just maybe you have some values. Please send them in. You can comment on social media or send them to me at steve@steveryancarter.com. Would love to learn how you guys are kind of protecting and preserving the trust of your kind of preaching stage and how you're shaping your people. Because again, I do think this is going to be a huge issue. Check out Preaching Today and Food for the Hungry, amazing sponsors. But until next time, friends, grace and peace. And may you know, God wants to do a work in you. And that work is for you, but that work is also for those you get to serve and embody his ways. And so just let him continue to do that good work, because I promise you, that's where the best sermons are going to always come from. Much love, everyone. Until next time, grace and peace.